We're live, brother.
Thanks, brother.
Welcome, man. Welcome. So I asked you on the way in. I said, "Have you ever been to a studio like this?" You said, "No." What are your first thoughts?
Man, it's beautiful in here.
Cool spot, huh?
Look at this. Like, I thought we'd be sitting on the couch over there. That'd be nice.
No,
but
we'll take a snooze afterwards. But for the purpose of being able to actually capture meaningful conversations, this is a pretty sweet spot, huh?
definitely.
So big shout out to our boy Jeremy at G-Man Productions. The guy's a beast. He put this all together. I haven't been able to tell you his story yet, but I was hoping that you'd be able to meet him. He's off in Jordan, running the show over there, but he'll be back soon enough. You'll get to shake his hand.
Safe travels over there, and thanks for having us in this beautiful space, man.
Yeah, the guy's a G. But man, this is a treat because this is we just kind of counted. This is a 20-year friendship in the making, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So where did we meet, Lee?
Man, good old St. Pete's. I think even like the year before we started high school. I think it was the year, maybe a few years before that.
I think it might have been a couple of years before that. But then we actually started, being able to chat regularly out, in free period and lunch and stuff. When was this? Grade 9, you think?
No, earlier. Grade
Was it?
7 or 8, man. We were in the.
It's been 20 years. It's definitely been at least 20
years.
years.
Class together, and you had you always had this pencil case with your calculator and your friggin' pencils, and you would always put it the side of your desk.
It was school, man. What do you expect?
No, but you were always very meticulous about how you wanted your things.
I think I carried that forward into my adult life as well.
100%.
You should see me put those Q-tips in the bathroom and all my colognes and stuff.
You haven't changed.
No, not at all. Not at all, man. So, dude, you've got a wild story that I followed it at the time. And I was hyped to watch you go through it all. But even at the time, I never really got the opportunity to ask you what drove it. So you had a really interesting jaunt through memory lane a short time back. Mm-hmm. Share a little bit about that.
Yeah. Where do we start though?
Start with the family tree.
Yeah. Okay. That's an amazing thing. One of the most pivotal moments in my life was the opportunity to go with my father and my brother to Belarus to meet all our family on my father's side. Basically we spent the past couple years, this was a few years back, researching our family tree, right? Because my dad never really knew his family. He knew them from letters through my grandfather that my grandfather would get from the war after he came over here. And what's really amazing is that, he would get all these letters and we wouldn't be able to we couldn't translate them. We didn't really know much about it until I had some friends that spoke Russian and Polish because the letters were both in Russian and Polish. So we started this journey, right? I just started to do this as a project with my dad. And at the same time that was happening, my dad would get these calls from someone over in Russia being like, hey, there's someone looking for you. And in the 90s, people thought that was like a spam call, right? They're like, this guy wants money. And my dad, he's like susceptible to that.
It was a Nigerian princess or something, right?
Well, they'd be like, hey, like your computer, and it happened to my dad before. And I felt bad for him when that happened. Like,
right.
Nonetheless, and he would think like, who's calling from where and why? But essentially it was a Russian show that was actually trying to match my grandpa's sister with my grandpa again and reconnect them. So this is what we later found out. Mm-hmm. Of course, my grandpa passed away over a decade ago. And at the time, it would have been amazing if we would have fell through with it, but we didn't realize that. So long story short, fast forward a couple of years, we started putting together these pieces, right? And then eventually we just started to reach out to people in Belarus. And I think we got a call or something. And it was actually the daughter of one of the siblings, basically. And we were just blown away. We're like, okay, we need to make this happen. We need to go to Belarus. And so the first thing we did was just start to gather information about who they were. We had a video call, and it was really cool to just see all of that unfold in real time of like connecting with family that my dad never knew. It was just my grandpa that came here, and then my dad's two brothers. And so we started to build this whole family tree, basically. And yeah, it was just an amazing experience to kind of put that together. And then we just said, listen, we need to go to Belarus, but we don't speak Russian or Polish. Turns out they all speak Russian in Belarus, obviously. And my buddy Ilya who's a really good friend of mine to this day. You know Ilya.
Yeah, I
He's
do
an
know.
entrepreneur as well. Shout out to him. Love the guy.
Out
He's
in
like,
Spain, I think. Yeah.
he just left actually.
Yeah. Spoke to him a little while ago.
Yeah, he's like my younger brother. He's amazing, and he came with us. So it was this
Yeah.
really amazing journey. So my brother Dimitri, Ilya, myself, and my father just went off for the first time, and I've never even been across the ocean with my dad. This was like
Let alone something of this caliber, huh?
100%. And so I have this all recorded, right? And I started to write like on my blog about it,
Yeah.
and just capture the journey. And basically, the whole time we were there, which was 2 weeks, it was the most transformative thing to ever experience. Like other than having a son, like this is a pivotal moment in my life to be able to go through this, see my dad basically connect with family and his history that he never had before.
Mm-hmm.
And the people there, they're so welcoming, and they're so they celebrate everything. Like we would eat like these huge meals, and coming from your background as well, right? Like all the family gets together. There's hundreds of people there, cousins, aunts, everyone, right? Like you have these huge meals, and you would drink, and then you would go off and go for a walk, and then you would like come back and like eat some more, and then you'd like dance, and you would talk, and celebrating the small moments, and appreciating all the small things, like wheelbarrow rides and stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like small stuff.
This was
like,
a ceremony.
yeah, it's the ceremony, right? And yeah, it was so beautiful to connect with people where you feel like you've never met them, but you have this connection with them. You're like,
Right.
it's like we've known each other forever, right out the gate. Like, and yeah, just to see my dad, one of the most amazing pieces to it was, and this is like a very personal piece, is to see, it's like my dad went through that healing process because my grandpa had passed away, right? So this was like healing for him. And one of the moments where I really reflected on that and saw my dad in a different light, like my dad's very stoic, and I don't really see him always in a more emotional light. And so it's interesting. We were sleeping on these small little, like just the same size of that couch, really, like cots. And like Belarus, they have all these small little cots, and in the country, wooden house, right near where my grandpa grew up, basically.
Right.
And we're going to sleep after a night of drinking or whatever. And my dad's just falling asleep, and he's just saying to himself, like, "Hey, like I'm here now, Dad. Like I'm here." And he was like crying himself to sleep. And I was like, "Holy shit!" Like for me to hear my dad talking to himself like that and just also crying himself to sleep, I was like, that's powerful. For my dad to be in the place where his dad was born and experience that history
for the first time
and have that closure in his life. Like I was like, this is amazing. That's like a gift that I'm so happy that I could help my dad experience.
Right.
Because for my dad, it was overwhelming to be like, we're going to a new country. He was game, but it was like, I know nothing. Like, how do I know these? The first question was, how do I even know if these people are
actually
my family?
Right.
So that's where that whole family tree and like collecting, getting all the research, getting Ilya to come in there was helpful. But yeah, just to see that was like honestly one of the most pivotal moments in the entire trip and in my life. And I feel like that was something I'm happy I could give to my dad. And we hope to go back there again, obviously. But we still talk with all our family. My dad still
I was going to say, I have a couple of loaded follow-up questions for you.
Yeah,
the first of which is, I imagine this is something that people probably struggle with. And actually, before I even get to that point, I want to touch really briefly on what you said about your dad healing.
Yeah.
The last time that I was in this studio was with Anessa, and Anessa spoke specifically about healing modalities. And this kind of touched on and shed a little bit of light even on some of the things that I feel a lot of us ignore, where we hold on to pain for years, years and years and years. And this isn't to say that there's a particular type. I think it's a spectrum, and it kind of ranges based on the different things that people have experienced and the impact that those things have had on their lives. In this case, you saying that you felt that your dad went through a healing process, the first piece of this loaded question is, did you find any healing while you were out there?
Yeah. I mean, to your point, the generational trauma, I feel to that of, is probably runs in my family in many different ways. And I think in this case, one of them is, just kind of giving some context to that question to answer it, is that my dad, having come from a family where it was mostly him and his brothers and his dad raising each other, so very male dominant, male driven, not a lot of emotions,
Stereotypical.
Buck up, like handle business, put food on the table, like that was life, right? And that's, that gets passed down in one way or another in some ways, right? And then my dad had 3 boys, and it's like, it's so interesting.
There's nowhere else for it to go other than to
I
you
mean,
three.
we could go even deeper, right? Like my dad's divorced. I also separated,
Yeah,
right? And I have
yeah.
a son, right? And like
Yeah.
I'm the only son of my mom and my dad. It's this whole thing, right? And I discovered that I've been going through therapy. But the whole point is like in that journey, that the healing process for me was actually reconnecting with my dad on a whole other level,
Right.
and my brother too, right? I think that was something where a lot of years went by when I was off, going to university and doing all those other things that I didn't get a chance to explore with my brothers, and I've never been on a trip with my brother or my father.
Mhm.
So getting in tune emotionally, and there's actually one other good scene that describes this healing journey is, after many drinks, things always change, and I always laugh when you always know that I'm like toasted when I just constantly laugh at stuff. And my brother, we just go outside, we're standing in like a field, middle of Belarus, and he's like, "Oh, we got to brush our teeth. Like we're going to bed." And I just like, "We don't need to brush our teeth." And I fucking whip my toothbrush like into the field, right? Just laughing.
Why did you have it with you? You just had it in your back pocket?
Yeah, I just had it. I don't know. I just had it, right? And I just whip it into the field. And then my dad came out, and then we just started talking about our grandfather and how we like missed him, right? And then we
Right.
just had this like big hug, and we're all like, tearing up and stuff. And it was just such a really solid bonding moment and that was like the healing, is these unexpected moments where you don't plan for anything and you don't know what's happening, but you're so open to the world and you're so open to that experience and you're fully present in the moment. And then
Right.
it's like it just like washes over you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my healing process, was reconnecting, I think, with my dad and my brother on a different level.
Okay.
In the most impactful way, at least.
Yeah, one that's
So,
I think you're gonna carry with you for the rest of your life.
yeah, 100%.
One that's gonna be in the back of your head and actually in the front of your mind for the rest of your life.
For sure.
The second part of this loaded question I was gonna ask you is, I'm sure there's other people who are likely wanting to pursue something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Even hearing you just describe this sounds wildly overwhelming. Where did you start? Like, what would you recommend as a starting point for somebody who wants to go and maybe go so far as to actually travel out and go meet long lost family?
Yeah. I mean, the starting point from us was just the sheer, it's always been for me, the curiosity of the experience, right? Always being
Right.
like, wow, like, is this real? Like, okay, let's figure out like a strategy to make it happen. And so the strategy was, let's collect all the right pieces of information. So let's review these letters, even though they're from like 1960 or 1950, 1940 in the war.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take stock of all the data that we have. And the data was, hey, we have these family members. So I started to draw out like a family tree, right? And start to plug it in. And then we validated it when we got there, but we started to paint the larger picture of like what had happened. And I think that's where you start, is you start to paint some context around the story, right? And some people, it starts with getting a 23andMe test or an Ancestry test or whatever, right? Also did that as well. But I think that's where you start, is you just start to take stock and have a bit of a strategy to approach it. And then, just start talking to people. Like we're like, okay, we need to jump on a Zoom call with this family member. We need to see them. We need to jump on a phone call, validate some things. You need to be a journalist for your own life.
Of course. I like that.
But no, I think you got to be a good researcher for yourself, right? You can't just jump into some scam. I mean, I'm sure that happens too, right?
Yeah,
but
of course.
I think it's and then you can make it a project, and we made it a project for 2 years before we even, or maybe, yeah, I think it was like 2 years.
Is that how long it took before you guys got on that plane?
I think so. Yeah. I think it was like
2 years.
a year and a bit. Like I have the photos, right? The photos show us like putting all these letters out, like tagging them, putting them across the table, translating them all. Lots of nights of like drinks with friends. And I'm grateful for both my buddy Ukash, who was, he was kind of translating all the Polish, and then Ilya was doing the Russian. And, yeah, it was just an amazing, that was all part of the journey. And then when we had everything in a row, we're like, part of it is taking the leap, I think. And yeah, you may have some fear, but you need to take the leap and be like, hey, this is going to be experienced one way or another. And we're going to go there, and we're just going to see what happens. Like we're going to a ex-Soviet country that has, the leader they have now, and there's no Canadian embassy. They still have capital punishment. Like we were like, what are we getting ourselves into,
Yeah,
right?
so it's a very, very different world.
Totally different world. And we're like, but you know what? We're together. My brother, dad, and I, we have each other's back, and we're gonna go there, and we're gonna enjoy ourselves and connect with family and make this experience happen. So
This must have been a hell of a ride, man.
it's again, like it seemed like yesterday sometimes, but it was a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah.
So
I still remind myself of we had spoken once in between a lot of this happening, where I think I sent you just a message. It was all just through text, and I said, "Man, what's going on?" And I'm gonna try to find it, and I'll just like put a screenshot,
That'd be awesome.
with this,
Get it in
or
here.
and I'll send it to you so you have a keepsake out of it as well. But I remember thinking to myself, that tenacity is something that I think has always been a part of who you are. But that was one of the first times that for myself I sat there and I was like, Lee's got this shit. Like Lee's gonna make this shit happen.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, I'm so glad you guys were able to share that experience with one another. And now you're sharing it with myself and everybody who's ever gonna, anybody's gonna listen to this is gonna get a really intimate look at what that was like for you.
Yeah, I think it's not over. I think the piece to this that's missing that we didn't kind of fully come full circle is that I would love to work on a little book with my dad. And I know he's had that in mind for a while.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't like to necessarily talk about projects before they happen, but I do think there's value in the journey's not over yet. And we're still talking to the family and we still want to go there. But I think there's a deeper thing to be explored here still, and it's not ended. So yeah, it's just the starting point.
Would the book be a recounting of all the blood, sweat, and tears that went into making this all happen?
I mean, it may be, but I think there's a deeper narrative at play about like fathers and sons and reconnecting
Right.
with your history and maybe that healing process that comes through it. So again, I think there's projects that are never ending, and some of them anyway. And so I think this is something where that's kind of shelved for now because, I'm preoccupied with other things. And
Of course.
again, I want my dad to lead some of those things too. This is very intimate and personal for him. So I think there's a huge opportunity for my dad to take ownership of that. And I'd love to help him because I was kind of the catalyst and I really pushed to like make us go to Belarus. And that's part of my personality, like the tenacity and also like, it was uncomfortable at times. Like we got into a lot of fights before we got there, because it was difficult for my dad to take that leap. And I was like, no, we're going. Like, let's get the tickets. Like, let's book it. So for now, I step back, and I think we're just going to let it unfold. But I definitely want to continue. There's something there that can be explored still.
So that's going to be a story for another time, I suppose, huh?
For sure.
People are going to be sitting here
stories.
foaming at the mouth, like,
Well,
how does the rest of this go?
I mean, it's on the blog, right, on Medium right now, and people can check it out for sure. But it's not.
I'll get the link from you.
Sure.
Before we close out shop here, and I'll make sure that I throw it into the show notes so people can go jump in and tag along with the journey.
Thanks,
this was a great segue into what I feel is going to be something that is equally, or has served rather, as an equal catalyst in your life, which is your transition to fatherhood. So River is a little champion. River's your boy.
There he is.
There he is. You want to hold that up for a sec? I mean, I don't know if that's really going to capture it.
I don't know if anyone sees him, but there he is.
But yeah, the guy's a little champ.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me, I still remember before he was born, you telling me that like you were anxious as shit at certain points where you were just like, holy shit, like this kid's going to be here. And you were just waiting for this train to come into station kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it got there. You jumped on and you ran with it. And now for me, behind the scenes kind of thing, not really being involved on an intimate level with what your transition has been like to fatherhood, I only ever hear about the glam, if you will, of how awesome a dad I know you are and how much better of a father I think you're going to become over the years. But what do you feel has been something that's just been seismic in your life with River, on your side now?
Yeah. Couple things. I mean, the number one thing that fatherhood has taught me, and I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it, but single parenting especially, is it's really given me resilience even more in my life to push through challenges. And because again, as a single parent and as a father, there's no one sometimes to step in for you, and so you need to continue to show up for yourself and for River at all costs. You can't quit. So you better figure out a way to make it happen. So that's kind of been the number one thing that I've learned, is it's really given me some more tools mentally, perseverance, resilience to keep going. That's always been something I've tried to cultivate, but especially now. And I think the third thing too, and probably the most important thing, and something I've also worked on in therapy, is the presentness and the being in the moment with him. I mean, this is the most beautiful thing, is when you can truly just kind of check in and be on his level. So, even if you get down physically on his level and everything from the way you communicate and acknowledge, his emotions and things, he really teaches. If you really listen to kids, they can teach you how to be in the present moment, because that's where they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they're this young, they're totally soaking it all in, and they're just totally tuned in
Yeah.
and embedded in the
They're
moment.
not thinking about a mortgage when they're playing with those Legos.
No, man, they're thinking about it's like they're curious, they're creative, they're so tapped in, and for me, that's the most beautiful piece, is just reminding me to step back into the present moment. So he's my biggest teacher. I know, my co-parent Jess and I, we talk a lot about that he's our biggest teacher, and
Yeah.
so that's the biggest blessing. And yeah, I would say beyond my father and I and Dimitri going to Belarus, like this is the number one thing that's happened. Like, I remember when he was born, one of my old mentors said, like, he's like, your greatest piece of artwork is complete now. And I was like, fuck yeah. I was just like,
I would argue that it's just getting started.
It is just getting started, but I liked how he phrased it, which is like, and in some ways, yes, of course, I'm actualizing my life and I'm doing all these other things. And all that, though, partly, to be honest, comes from a place of just wanting to provide that security and longevity to pass to River and whatever other, if I ever have any other children, but I'm not even thinking about that. It's just simply like, hey, like the rest of this it's not really about me. Yeah, sure, it's about me in some ways, but it's truly for him. I want him to have opportunity, right?
Right.
So,
do you feel prior to him being born that you had detached from some of the things that so you spoke pretty specifically, and you've said it a couple of times now, about being present. Do you feel like you had kind of been removed from that?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there's a period between, I can't even recall when. Sometimes I feel like it's been forever. It's like, I feel like often when we pass from childhood to, teenager and, teenage years, and then we move into university, and then now we're in, working adult life. Like there's a lot of time that passes. And for me, maybe I felt like I wasn't as tuned into where I was headed or where I was going. And it kind of filtered out a lot of the noise in my life that wasn't there. And, some of those things are friends, right?
Yeah.
A couple of friends fell off the boat for me, and that was challenging. That was upsetting to me. And I've worked through, not having hard feelings for that anymore. And I wish them the best, but there is a natural dissolution of friendships that occurred. There's jobs that weren't a fit anymore. Like, so it does help you if you choose to see the opportunity. It actually helps you filter out a lot of stuff that is just bullshit. That's wasting your time.
Right.
And so it definitely helped me just kind of check right into the moment and be like, as you just said, you felt, I don't know what person wouldn't feel anxious about a child coming in some ways, right? I think it's natural, but I think that it really helps you tune right into being like, hey, what's your actual priorities here? And what do you need to get done to make your life happen? Because now you don't just wake up and like, I'm going to eat some cereal and play video games. Not that I was doing that before, but that's you. That's what you're doing.
That's what you're doing now. Right?
No, that's what I'm doing now, obviously. That's what River's doing now. No, I'm just kidding. No, but you wake up and you're like, there's a mouth to feed. So we better make it happen.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting that you kind of bring up the whole notion of there's this longevity in this, call it almost what's the word? It's almost like he's your succession in a very, very real way. And I look at that and I say, oftentimes from other single parents that I've spoken to, that I've had the privilege of talking to, and other close friends, some of whom I'll bring that up after, but they've often said, my child reminded me that there were versions of, actually before I get to that, there were friends of mine that I outgrew, the same way that there were versions of myself that I outgrew. So yeah, maybe someone was that cereal eating, video game playing person for however long. And then they realized that wasn't who they really needed to be or who they wanted to be for, whatever period of time, because now there was a child. And that grounded them. So when you talk, when I asked you, did you feel that you had been removed? Oftentimes people have said that anxiety that comes from just before the child is born is almost like a rope that's been cast around them and it's reeling them back in. And then when the child gets here, the rope falls loose and now they're just like, holy shit, like I'm back. And now I can run this the way that I need to for the betterment of my own life and for the love and everything that I feel for my child. And so that's something that I feel, I've heard you talk about this every time you've brought up River. From the very, very beginning, when you told me his name, you sent me a picture and you didn't even tell me his name at one point early on. And then you told me his name. I was a little bummed out that his name wasn't Kumar, but I'll get over that. Well, fingers crossed for the next one.
Oh, man. Yeah, I feel like there's this beautiful freedom that comes with it. Because again, reducing the noise, there is, and honestly, even also again, as a single parent, there's this additional layer of freedom in some ways. So it's like, you have this, like, I've gone through the fire. I'm a father now. But I'm also like a single parent, and I feel some ways like sometimes I have the best of both worlds, where I'm like still being this like bachelor, you know, like again, I'm not being a bachelor in like that sense, but I'm like 50% of the time when I'm not with River, I have a lot of free time. And as you know, which is why I stack up that time with entrepreneurship and the things
Of
I'm
course.
doing. Right. So it's this weird thing that I explain where it's like almost feels it, and it affected me for actually quite a while, of like this weird time where I felt it's like a prison sentence because I want to be with him all the time, right?
Yeah.
But I have to share him with my co-parent and his mother, and that's awesome. It's beautiful as well, of course. But it's this weird thing that you have to go through, I think, at the beginning where you're like, oh, like I'm waking up still in my 4-bedroom home by myself, and
Right.
that fucks with you. And if you don't have, you know,
You're talking the absence fucks with you?
yeah, the absence of being like, hey, I want to, like, there's moments that, you know, Jess will experience with River that I'm not there for.
Right.
Right. And we have to accept that
And
as
vice
part
versa.
of this. Exactly. Right. But it's interesting when you first go through that, there's no roadmap to be like, guess what? You're going to not experience all the moments. So get ready. It's like, oh, River just started walking. Maybe I wasn't there for that at that time. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that hits you at first because you're like, hey, it's right in front of your face being like, this, you are not with him 100% of the time. And so that was a bit challenging at first, working through that hurdle of having this freedom. And that's why I've worked so hard in my time when I'm not with him, because I'm maximizing every moment to be like, how do I get back to the more time with him, more freedom for all of us, for his mother, for myself, right? And him. So yeah, that's definitely a challenging piece to that.
It must be kind of wild to watch his personality unfold as well.
Man.
For all the ways that, you know, you speak of, I guess to some extent, missed moments, but in other ways, if you kind of pivot a little bit and shift that perspective, you could say moments that you'll experience later.
For sure.
Right. But for all of that, I imagine that the personality shift and the personality just coming into the fray is something that you probably experience every step of the way in varying degrees.
He's so curious, so imaginative, and I'm sure lots of parents say that about their children, right? But he's very witty. Like yesterday, he came by quickly and he's like, "What the heck, Dad?" Like, and he's like, "Get it together." And I was like, "What? Like, what do you say?"
Have you ever said something like that to him?
No, Jess jokes. She's like, "Oh, like tell Dad to get it together," and he's like, "What the heck, Dad? Get it together." You know, I'm like, "I got it together." Like, so just stuff like that, like very, and when you really like encourage your children and you engage with them, they can have conversations with you. You just have to get on their level and understand like kind of where they're coming from.
Their language.
Yeah, their language. That's it. Because he asks really thorough questions. Like, I think I've told you this. He asked me like, "What's that?" And I'm like, "That's the solar system," because we were looking at some spacebook. He's like, "What about that?" I'm like, "That's a galaxy." And he's like, "A galaxy?" And like, he may not conceptually fully process that, but he certainly has some vague understanding of that. Or we walk by a car and I've explained to him many times like what a reflection is, right? Where he looks in the puddle and like to see him like his eyes just like you know, it's when I explain
that discovery.
Discovery, the curiosity, and I just love that. It's the most amazing thing to see that. And then he's like, "Look, Dad, reflection." I'm like, "Got it." Like, you know,
and now so do you.
Reflection forever. Thank you.
Exactly.
I don't want to see it.
We're still working on it.
Yeah.
Actually, it's funny you bring up space and just the curiosity of children. My niece, I remember her. So her and my nephew are playing or whatever on a kitchen table, and Arian so that's my nephew. He put a ball or whatever it was, or like a little stack of cards or something, too close to the edge. And Milla, my niece, she's like, "Ari, don't do that. Gravity's gonna get it." And like we're sitting there, like, what the hell are you talking about?
How old is she?
But at the time, I think she was 4 years old.
Perfect.
But it was just it came out of nowhere, right? This was just exposure through Spacebooks. You know what I mean? And she was sitting there, you know, asking me why something has a particular chemical compound, and I'm sitting here like, "Girl, what do you like?"
You're
no,
like, "I don't even know.
We're gonna play with dolls."
Google.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like at that point, I was like, "No, we're not having this conversation." But the way that you can see them learning is something that I imagine. I can't relate as a parent, but I can definitely, you know, enjoy it peripherally through friends, family, anybody who has a child and who talks about these kinds of stories where you see the curiosity, you see that discovery happen real time. And it almost, for me anyway, it kind of brings me back to wanting more of it.
Yeah.
And never stop learning and continuously ask questions. And when you're done asking questions, ask more.
Yeah.
But kids just never stop, right? We can learn a
Yeah.
lot from him.
I mean, there's a time when River, sometimes he just goes, "Why, Dada? Why, Dada?" And I'm like, I answered the question. I'm like, no more whys, you
Yeah.
know, like, but yeah, there's definitely,
I mean, we do that to each other every so often too. So
that's true.
yeah,
Yeah. There's the playful element. I think that's important, that playful curiosity
right.
in life, and stoking imagination. Like
Mhm.
you need imagination in life. Without imagination, it can be quite mundane. So
Yeah.
I think continuing to cultivate imagination and creativity is a key piece to living a good life, you know, because that fuels your passions.
So I was going to say this is another great. My boy Lee out here being the king of segues. This is
I'm not
another
even
great
trying.
segue. You've had in my eyes, you've had a decorated career, in the sense that you've tried your hand at so many things. And you've poured your heart and soul into a lot of things. And I think it's part of where, when I mentioned the tenacity of just your character, that's where I think that's come from. And now hearing you mention passion, there's never been a limitation on your passion, or maybe not limitation is not the right word. There's never been a muted passion that's come from you whenever I've seen you try something.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me a little bit about your own entrepreneurial spirit, your own entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I think it just comes back to this need to actualize myself by trying different things and creating different things, and part of the thing that stokes that is bringing people together around a vision. And so whatever vision that is, seeing all these different inputs from people that you can collaborate to make something happen. I think that's what makes it exciting for me, is to be like, hey, what's this thing that we're, now it's a little bit more refined because I've gone through the green stage of, a few entrepreneurial journeys, and I would call it failing, but learning
The
through
green
them.
stage.
Yeah, the green, like being green and not really knowing much. And I feel like I'm always still learning. But the point is the entrepreneurial spirit comes from that desire to create things with other people. And I think it's so amazing. And now I would say, okay, well, we're solving a problem. So like, being a little bit more practical here is like, what problem are we solving, and how can we coalesce around that and solve that problem together? And that's like, the passion comes out of that process. Like the passion is the actual journey that you go through in there. And I'm addicted to it. I mean, to the highs and the lows.
Of course.
And I think any entrepreneur that really loves it is, you love that experience. And in the moment, sometimes you have a hard time maybe loving it because it may be bad in that moment. But at other times when you reflect back, you're like, I wouldn't have done anything else other than that thing.
Yeah.
So that's where my spirit comes from, is just this discovery piece, learning whatever I can on the journey to make it happen. And yeah, just it's so much more rewarding to be able to live that way for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I like to live.
Yeah.
So.
And I know you've transitioned back into and back out of corporate roles. I kind of feel personally, I just feel like you're not built for them because you're better than them.
I mean,
and I don't say that.
that.
I don't say that from a place of trying to make you sound arrogant
No.
or anything, other than just the fact that I think you're just capable of more.
Yeah.
And you've proven to yourself and to people around you that that's the case. This new project.
Yeah.
You want to introduce it real quick?
Yeah, I can plug it in real quick. This new project is Heartstring, right?
Mm.
And it's a video only dating app. So.
Okay.
To put it in like a 30-second or less pitch here, basically is that when you see someone on video, you get a better sense of their vibe out the gate, right? Their tone of voice, body language, all of it. And that will help create a better experience, I think, in dating, because right now we're dealing with a lot of static profiles,
Right.
Text.
Static profiles just being ones that are created by companies or whatnot.
Well, they just don't give enough information, right? Maybe you get some old photos on a dating profile. You get some text about how you like cheese. Like, does that really help me understand that we have a connection?
Right.
Just like you meet someone in real life, the first thing you're doing is you're getting a sense of their vibe, right? You're not like, what's your resume? Do you go to this university? Like, nobody really cares about that. And if you do, okay, fine. But in this case, I just think the majority of people are busy swiping, and maybe they're passing up people that they may actually have a valid connection with or feel a vibe with. So it's video only, and there's only 3 matches. And part of that thing is to solve the problem that people are exhausted. And
when you say only 3 matches, real quick here, do you mean 3 matches at a time, or do you mean 3 matches?
You can only chat with 3 people at any given time. So you have to be a little bit more intentional in your dating process, right?
Right.
And I think that part of that is because we wanted to solve the problem of people feeling overwhelmed or like it's work to communicate with, I don't know, however many people they're communicating. Every time I spoke to daters, it's always the same thing coming up, which is that I have so many matches. I'm tired. I'm exhausted before I even get started in the dating experience.
Right.
So yeah, video first and 3 matches. That's kind of our starting point as our MVP. We just launched it a month ago, and now we're just hitting the ground running and get people in there. I'm thinking again, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, all video content dating is going to be all video content. All
Right.
the 80% of the internet right now in terms of
video
content is video, TikTok, Instagram stories. So pretty much replicates a combination of TikTok and Instagram in its own way.
Right.
So
Do you think this will act slightly as a corrective measure against the wild, out of control vanity that comes from dating apps?
yes and no. I
And
think
maybe not vanity only, but validation, that I think often these dating apps serve way more a purpose for validation than they do anything else, it seems.
Yeah, so the one thing about video and what's interesting is that you put a lot more on the line in a way, in some way. You make yourself a little bit more vulnerable because it's quite real time, right? You're
Right.
making a video, so you're really exposed. You can't really hide behind a static photo. So I think in some ways it definitely can combat that, and you have to actually put a little bit more effort in to make a video, I think, in some ways. Again, depends on your personality, what you want to show. I mean, look, if we were just recording a video right now of us doing the podcast, it's not that hard for us to do that and throw it on a profile and be like, hey, here's something I love doing.
Right.
I'm Kumar, I do podcasts,
Right.
right? But if you want to say something with your friends, maybe you can set it up a little bit more and add to that like piece of, planning it a little bit better versus more spontaneous.
Yeah.
But I don't know, in terms of vanity, I think part of it is I just want to see I want to see what daters do. I don't want to dictate or assume how anyone is going to use the tool. I want to actually see what people do and how maybe it does change the landscape. Maybe it makes people more vain. I literally have no idea, right? So
Yeah.
I do think though that it can give people a better shot at vibing with people they may or may not otherwise think they would. And I do think it gives people a better shot at actually showcasing a little bit more of their life. Like think about how many sometimes you post, when you're traveling, right?
Yeah.
You post like, hey, I'm out here. Here's some food I'm eating. Here's what I'm up to. Some cool people I'm meeting. Like that's a much better representation and a much more exposure of your life than me seeing just a photo of you
With a blurb.
Right? And
Yeah.
and part of that is that people need to realize that we're also all doing the same, and we already do that right now on Instagram. And every time people meet on dating apps, often the main question that is asked is, hey, can I see your Instagram? Why are
Right.
they asking that question? They're asking that question because they want to get a sense of your life, and they want to situate themselves a little bit into it and see like, okay,
Where do they fit?
yeah, I think that's part of it. We want to see like, hey, how can we integrate in this person's life? What's the larger picture
Right.
of their life? So yeah, I think that's kind of the angle of where we came from, is like, we just think video's the vibe, period.
Right.
So
What are next steps for Heartstring?
our next steps are just to continue to talk to every single person about it and build our brand awareness and continue to, it's build a brand awareness, talk about it, talk about how video is the next step in online dating. And that's where it starts. That's the next steps, and build traction and show the user base in all these other apps out there that there's something a lot cooler and different happening over here, and they should come try it out.
Yeah.
Because I know they're tired of those apps.
Well, I feel like the reason that the space got so saturated is because everybody just did the same thing a little bit more gimmicky than the other.
Yeah,
Is that fair to say? Is that a fair
100%,
assessment?
or pretty, like, there's a lot of them that have come out that are, they're niche, and I think it's fun for a moment, but it's not. I'm not interested in the niche. I'm interested in something that changes kind of the culture and the landscape. So there's ones, you can date only on like Thursday, and I'm like, why do I have to only date? That just seems so absurd.
Seems like a chore.
Yeah, but that's to counteract the like endless machine of the swiping. So I get
Right.
where they came from, but I'm like, that is just kind of annoying, because what if I'm single parenting on Thursday nights and I can't jump on to the app, and because I'm with River all night.
Right.
So Thursday's the only night I can date. Like, literally makes no sense. So it's a good angle, but again, not to shit on other dating apps out there. They're making it happen, but it's just, I think that niche apps will only have their moment for so long, but the ones that people are always going to are always the same ones, right? The household names that we all know, that we all use.
The Tinder, Bumbles, Hinges.
But they're literally all the same version of the same type of model, which is
Right.
either swipe-based model or stacking on more and more features and more adware or advertising and everything else, right? And
Yeah.
more subscription. And
Well, in a conversation you were having recently, it perked my ears up where I think either you had shed light on it or the person that you were speaking to had shed light on it, saying the reality of these apps is that they don't want you to find somebody.
yeah,
They want you locked in this endless ecosystem where they can continuously keep charging you over and over and over again for some form of a quote unquote value add that they are presumably pitching you to say, hey, you'll get better matches if you buy this and use this. What are they? Boosts or something is what they're. I can't remember what they're called, but boosts I think is what one of them was called.
yeah.
So things like that over and over again.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle because I think for most of us, that's some of the only ways we meet people, right? We may not go
Right.
out because of our job, because of whatever it is, right? It may be hard to go out. And look, even I, the other day I was out like past 10 and I'm normally in bed at friggin' 10, but it's like, I'm old, right? I'm 85 now. But, but I was like, unless you're going out somewhere, like, or you belong to a community like the gym, but even then who picks up people at the gym? I don't know anyone that does that, but my point is, we usually go back to the apps. And so
Right.
we have this relationship where we may say on one night, I don't want to purchase a subscription to this app. But then, we've maybe swiped all the swipes we can in that day and we're still like, oh, I have no one to talk to. I have no matches. So we get in the cycle and we're like, okay, I'm going to buy a subscription now. And then we're going to have this subscription for a month. I mean, I've been there many times.
Do you think there was a huge uptake during the pandemic spell?
Yeah.
Of when lockdowns hit hard and things like that, people immediately rushed back into some of the more digital ways to meet people?
Yeah, the data is there. Tinder has the biggest subscription base, and it's only continued to rise post-COVID.
Is this? I don't know if this is something that you would know, but is this measurable or not? Is this measurable? But is the quality of the users measurable?
I mean, like a happiness index or something.
I don't even mean like the individual level. I'm talking more. So I'm kind of bringing this up through a proxy kind of way of what's going on with Twitter right now, where Twitter has some obscene number of bots. And so I just wonder, I say, if it happened there, and of course you can't really compare the two, they're very, very different platforms. But is there an issue like that exists within the dating pools that are on these apps?
That's a good question. I think there probably is. I mean, as you know, there are dating apps that do, we kind of talked about this on the way over, right? There are dating apps that seed their apps with fake profiles, right? We know that. So that's similar to the bot scenario.
Right.
But beyond that, I wouldn't really know. But I do think that people are on all three of the main like there's no loyalty. There's no loyalty amongst apps, right? So people probably experience that on all the household name apps at this point anyway.
Yeah.
Which is why they're so, feeling not empowered and they're feeling just like a number.
You think people are just sick of it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm sick of it. This is why I created a dating app.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think your response was to fix it.
That's exactly it. And when I started to create it, people laughed, and I laughed too. I was like, yeah, it's not a joke. Like I was like, I'm going to do it. And people laughed, right? But they're like, no, you can't. And I was like, no, I'm definitely doing it. And here we are a year later, right? With an actual app and hitting the ground running. But I think that people are sick of it, but it's because the way they've been confined to a certain type of experience in the current apps that are out there. But we can change that experience and we can do better. And people, I think, are always willing to try something else because the three main ones, they're all the same experience. You can just add more perks and boosts, but it's not giving you the quality, or it's not giving you the experience perhaps that you're looking for, which again, I think some of the main things we're seeing is people want more intentional connection. They want to know, like, what are you looking for? Not just swiping on. What are you actually looking for in a partner? Does it stem from values? Does it stem from interests? It also stems from, again, vibes and chemistry. And the way those profiles are designed, they can't give you that. They can't give you that out the gate. Because you're like, how many people I've talked to and they go, listen, on a Friday night when I've had, a couple glasses of wine, I change my preference settings. You go, you set all these preferences and it's so arbitrary. But then immediately, like, it's getting late. I've swiped everyone. I'm going to change my preferences now. So that tells me
so I can open up the parameters.
Preferences are not a good indicator for romantic chemistry.
Right.
So I think, again, I wanted to start very simply at a very basic concept, which is just like videos and 3 matches. Let's now start from there and get feedback from daters and grow this thing and build in other little things that may change the experience. But again, it's starting at the basic premise of seeing you, hearing you, and your vibe is going to give me a lot more information in 1 to 3 seconds than
This feels like a reboot of a cultural practice, quite honestly. So when I think
Yeah.
about the big three, I say Tinder was traditionally, and I don't know if this is still the case, but I imagine it is. Tinder was often used if you just wanted to fuck some girl, if you were a guy, or you just wanted sex.
Yeah.
Bumble was the response to Tinder, where women got sick and tired of thirsty betas. And so now Bumble handed the keys to women, saying, you're going to initiate a conversation only if you are interested in a particular match. And then Hinge seemed to have struck the middle ground of all that, where it was trying to do what I think you're saying with this intention. Hinge kind of struck me as well as just being a little bit more intentional with the questions that it would ask and the prompts that it would ask of you. But you're right, they're all the same thing, just amalgamated differently and presented in a different face kind of thing, or they've got a facelift each time.
Facelift, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to see the kind of evolution of it, right? It's like we went from web-based, like Plenty of Fish and whatever ones were out there, to like the swipe model. They're all still in that format of the swipe model, but Hinge just made it from a kind of design perspective a little more kind of exciting than like at least out the gate at the beginning. And yeah, maybe a little more intentional with the prompts. I think the prompts are interesting, but something I do hear from daters as well is that in creating profiles, it's a lot of work, especially if you have multiple dating apps, which most people do. They typically have 2 to 3 dating apps on their phone. So they got to go and set up the profile. And maybe you're like, why do I want to make a prompt? Like, why do I feel it may be hard for some people to also make prompts? And that's, again, some of the things that we have heard before. So for me, I was like, why do we have to spend all this time, making a profile? Can I just get on there and start seeing people and making content just like on Instagram? And it's funny, there's a whole thing now on TikTok of people either posting on TikTok that they're single and they're like, I'm taking applications for boyfriends or girlfriends.
Right.
I'm sure you've seen
There's
that.
a big uptake for it, right?
Uptake that, but also another one is like sliding into your DMs on Instagram. A lot of people I know do that. And it's like, but I still think there's this whole space and opportunity to keep dating discreet. I don't think it bleeds into the social. People still want to be like, hey, I'm dating and it's separate from my social world where I share with my friends and family, on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. So again, I was like, why aren't we taking this model of how people are already sharing their life world and putting it into a dating app? It seems clear to me that that's the evolution of this. So, and I also think it's kind of weird, like the way that some of these apps have labeled what their like vision or purpose is, like Hinge saying like designed to be deleted. If you just want to be the matchmaking engine, that's fine. But for me, it's like, what's the larger life cycle? Like we kind of talk about this, right? About self-growth and stuff. Well, there's a whole area of work that still can continue after you've matched, which is relationships, like, understanding like questions you may have while you're going through a relationship, right? Like that's why there's all these coaches now and all these relationship coaches. And I think that a lot of people forget, like, it's not just about matching. There's a whole larger journey to dating that you can continue. And I think that's cool. And I'm just like, why do we just want to get the people in, get them to buy a subscription? They go off, then they come back on. Like every person I talk with typically goes in that cycle until they're with someone. So yeah, it's a really interesting space. And I just think there's huge opportunity to change the landscape. And it's so, as again, we talked about this on the way over. It's like the chasm to get there is so high though, because the big three and a couple other companies they own the market. But I do think people are out there. Everyone you talk with is like, they do crave something beyond that. So
that was something that I think I saw a lot of. I ran a men's group while I was traveling when I did South America, Southeast Asia, and Eastern Europe. And every little step that I kind of took, it was initially designed as a way to bring men together to speak about pairing their personal goals with their professional ambition without having to compromise on either. And part of it was born out of, my desire to just have more masculine men in my life. I don't feel I had them when I was a child. I didn't really feel that it was something I even really paid attention to in my adolescence. And then it was only when I started kind of coming into young adulthood and then now into my adult life that I felt that there was an adequate presence and one that I felt was intentional. And so these conversations, when they started, were how do I do exactly that? How do I pair my professional aspirations with my personal goals and not compromise on either? But then gradually it started shifting to men, and this was men of ages from call it 18 to 38 is kind of what it was. And that 20-year disparity between the 18-year-old and that 38-year-old often boiled down to there were subtle differences, but they wanted the same thing, which was longevity, peace of mind long term. Even when these men's groups changed to almost a dating group, and I started talking to these guys about, look, you wanting to date women is very different than you wanting to copulate with women. And oftentimes you're blurring, you're creating this blur between both of them, where you're putting more weight on one versus the other, and then complaining when the one that was neglected doesn't end up playing out. So if you just want more women, if you just want to sleep with more women, that's a very different goal and something that I think has its own set of issues and its own set of problems than if you want to date women intentionally for the purpose of building an actual relationship. And having them verbalize that and then come to terms with it was something that I feel was created, that disparity between the two of them was created because they got so used to just swiping. They had no idea how to talk to women. So every single time we would take them, I'd take them out. We did field days is what we called them, or field trips for some of them. And oftentimes I would tell the guys, I'd say, look, you're going to throw down $500. And these were paid groups. I'd say, you're going to throw down $500 and I'm going to give you back $50 for every number you pull. And all of a sudden now they're sitting there thinking, holy shit, that $500 is at the time, holy shit, that's rent. Yeah, I'm going to go get these 10 numbers.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the fear goes away. But where was it introduced to begin with? It's because they just stopped talking to people. This had nothing to do with, ultimately, this had nothing to do with women. This had everything to do with the fact that these men did not know how to communicate because they
100%.
relied so heavily on this archaic, clunky bullshit mechanism of just swiping superficially on people that you think you like.
Dude, that's a really important point that you brought up, and going deep here on just men's work in general. Like, as you know, right? Like, to your point of doing men's work and founding that men's group, like the Grounded Man previously that you came to that event board that we founded, right?
Yeah.
It's like, that's something for me here that I really realize is that a lot of men struggle with communicating with women. And the swiping is one piece, but it's also the gaming community. As you know, that is a huge piece to that. A lot of people now, especially younger, again, 18, 20, like those age groups, there's this whole thing of like just like e-sex and having an e-girlfriend.
That's so stupid.
But that's what I'm saying is like they're coming up with this experience and like they literally have no clue how to even like engage in the chase and the fun that comes with that too, right? And having the confidence to be able to just speak up to anyone that you're like, hey, you know what, I'm going to go up and whatever happens, but I'd like to chat with this woman, looking at her in the eyes, like that kind of stuff, right? Like a lot of people have a challenge with doing that because they're not used to that. They're literally behind their laptop or their game. Like, it's funny, a lot of I saw this about a lot of the Twitch streamers and things, like they may have like literally, millions of followers, or they're YouTubers, but some of them literally have the hardest time of just being able to speak to the opposite sex.
But they get so fixated on only knowing how to communicate through a screen.
Yeah.
This is the same thing as what I think. When you think of how much of a negative impact pornography has on specifically on men, it just fucks men up left, right, and center. I don't think women have I think it can mess up women as well, but I think physiologically and psychologically it fucks men up way more than it fucks up women. And one of the examples that I brought up in that group that I was running, on one of those days, we were walking through a grocery store and there was this girl who had a treble clef tattooed on the back of her neck. Her name was Katie, still a friend of mine. Saw her in the international aisle or whatever of like a superstore, Walmart, whatever it was. And I walked by, and it was in the summer, so I had a t-shirt and shorts on. Almost, like the better part of the left side of my body is inked. Yeah. And I walked by and I was like, tattoos are really stupid, aren't they? That was how I opened the conversation with this girl. Yeah. And she turned around, you could tell, like, initially, and I kept walking. I didn't really stop. I just figured if she's going to respond, she's going to respond. And if she's not, who cares? And she turned around and it almost felt like she was about to pounce. Like she was about to say, like, who the fuck are you? Like she was about to just let me have it. Yeah. And instead her response was, yeah, they're the worst, aren't they? I bet you probably know about it, right? She kind of teased me, haha. Yeah. And that was the way that I opened that conversation. Yeah. And we ended up dating for a while. Like we had a good time and we became good friends out of it. The relationship part of it wasn't something that I think was ever really there, but it doesn't mean that the friendship wasn't. And so in this case, the longevity and the sustainability of that particular relationship was friendship. And that was great. We still kind of laugh about that, saying it was the reason I'm bringing it up is because it's so easy to talk to people if you just stop thinking about if people put down the scripts for 5 seconds and just say what you feel.
Yeah.
Obviously within reason. Don't be a fucking creeper, but say what you feel, and the person will either vibe with you or they won't.
Yeah.
And if they don't, that's okay.
Yeah.
There's no, supreme arbiter of humanity who is telling you that every single person you come in contact with has to like you, and every single person that you come in contact with, you have to like.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a requirement for you establishing relationships and even just flexing and exercising a communication muscle.
100%. And you have no idea where anything can go, but you know exactly where it can go if you don't say anything, which is
Right.
nowhere.
Nowhere.
So, I mean, that's an interesting thing. A funny story. The other day, I went for a run and I ended up walking all the way up Somerset with this beautiful woman across the street, and she was also walking. And I was like, I had my like little water bottle that River always takes, and it's a really, one of those like foldable ones. And I just, as soon as I turned over and I was sipping it, and she looked right at me, right across the street, and I was just like,
Perfect timing.
I was like, fuck, this is perfect. And I just like kind of smiled at her in an awkward way, and she was smiling at me. And then we kept walking for literally 15 minutes all the way up the street. And I was like, I'm overthinking this. I should just walk over there and go, hey, it looks like you need a walking partner I'm not sure if it's safe.
Beauty.
I should walk you home. But I didn't.
Ah.
And that's the thing. And so, but I can self-reflect and know that, hey, I just didn't do it. That's fine. I'm not usually, it's not that I don't feel confident in doing that. It's just in that moment, I didn't act on it, but I thought about it. And I was like, you know what? I overthought this. I'll let it go. But it's funny. We walked up again, all the way up to where I was going to turn off, and she actually crossed the street. And there was this that was the moment. The moment is she crossed the street and we're just about to run into each other. And I was going to either say like, hey, do you need a walking buddy, or are you following me right now? Like that was basically what I was about to say. And I just didn't act on it. And so if you're watching this, reach out to me, because I definitely want to talk, but just had to plug that. But no, it was like one of those things where that's an opportunity. I kind of love the fun and enjoyment of talking about that, because I think it's important to reflect on like, hey, you know what? There's nothing lost. I could have just had a candid conversation. Maybe nothing comes out of it, but it could have been just fun to just say hi or to say that joke and go from there.
It's a muscle that I feel people don't work out nearly as much as they really desperately need to.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, man, you could have just gone up and been like, it looks like we're on the same route.
Correct. Yeah. But normally that doesn't happen to me, but I'm just saying that's an example of an opportunity where like I chose not to take it.
Yeah.
But again,
we're our worst critics. And
100%.
I've said this, people have now heard me say this probably 3 of these sessions in a row, but we're the only ones holding up a stop sign.
Yep.
No one else is telling you. It's not like she told you not to approach her.
Nope.
And for men out there, specifically younger men who are worried about rejection, shut the fuck up.
And I think it's important. I think actually it is important to be rejected so that you can improve. You can be like, okay, cool. What can I improve on? What's something I can work on?
But
you need
the
that.
beauty of it is that I think a lot of people, I shouldn't say the beauty of it. The piece that I think is missed is that rejection for a lot of guys, and I think arguably to some extent for a lot of women as well, rejection feels deeply personal.
Yeah.
Well, how can it possibly feel deeply personal when the person doesn't know you? They're rejecting your approach.
Yeah.
You approach them, something didn't vibe, they could have been having a bad day, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Insert whatever variable you want. That's all it is. Chalk it up to them just not vibing with you that particular day, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I mean, it's okay because there's also literally hundreds of millions of people out there in the world. And
Amen.
And then, you know what? If you were rejected and you truly believe that that's the love of your life, then chase it. Then step up to it then and be like, I'm going to show this person that like I'm interested in this person. So again, maybe that's part of it. I don't know. I'm not in their shoes or their scenario, but
there's an interesting comment sent to me. Someone speaking of sliding into DMs, someone slid into my DMs and was like, hey, really, really cool girl. She was like, hey.
You're getting people sliding into DMs? Awesome, bro.
She's like, hey, I saw this podcast or whatever, blah, 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 blah. Where else have you, just to be clear, it's not like she slid in romantically. This was, like, the girl was like, she's a legitimately chill girl and just wanted to kind of talk about what direction this was going to head in.
Yeah.
Specifically just these sessions. And I told her, I said, there's no real formality to it. I've mentioned this to you recently as well. There's no formality to it. This was just supposed to be a time capsule and just a way with which I could capture really meaningful and deeply impactful conversations with people that I know, care, and love about. Know, care, and love. And so her asking this question, we got into this conversation, and I don't think this is even something that you know, but that men's group ended up morphing into a women's group as well.
Very cool.
There was a women's group that came out of that. And that started with one of the guys who was in the men's group. His name was Tyler. His wife actually came in and approached me immediately following one of the sessions when we were in the middle of an actual curriculum session. And she says to me, she's like, hey, look, I don't know what it is that you guys talk about, and I don't want to know, but Tyler has been more decisive. Tyler has been more him. Tyler has been more the man that I fell in love with 18 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be willing to speak to, I have a friend of mine, Laura. Laura runs a women's group. Would you be interested in just speaking with her? Maybe not even interested, but could you just speak with her, period?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot that she could learn from you because she has a lot of women in that group that come in and ask questions about men, and she has no way with which to answer them from a place of authenticity because she herself is a woman.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yeah, sure, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Met up with Laura, had these long conversations with Laura. Laura says to me, could you come in and do a session for us? And in my head, I'm thinking at that point, I had done 19 cohorts of 20 men, is how far I had gone into this men's group.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my mind, the blueprint that I had was the exact same blueprint that I had. The blueprint for the women specifically was the same blueprint that I had for the men in the sense that I was going to lead it the same kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking 20 women, cool. I show up and there's 150 women in this room, in this auditorium. And I'm sitting here shitting a brick saying, what did I just get myself into? Like, holy shit.
Yeah.
But then I said, well, this is great because if those were 20 apiece, this is almost 8 sessions all in, or this is almost 8 cohorts all in one.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, great, cool. Let's have this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So it was awesome to see that for all of the differences that exist between men and women, we have way more similarities and we have way more things that can bring us together than can drive us apart.
Mm-hmm.
But more often than not, we spend way more time thinking about the things that are driving us apart than bringing us together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so now coming full circle, part of where I think this is coming from is because we've been conditioned to only judge each other based on this superficiality of swiping and all this kind of shit. So now talking about going video only, or maybe not video only, I don't think it's the right term, just going more natural with video seems like it's an effective way with which to try and, you mentioned it earlier, but there's these chasms that we have to cross.
Mm-hmm.
I think introducing video into our lives, or introducing a little bit more video into our lives, specifically as it relates to our romantic interests, will lessen the divide and probably let us be a little bit more, like you said, intentional about who we spend our time with, which is something we should be doing anyway.
Yeah, 100%. Be intentional in your time and energy.
Yeah.
You gotta protect that. So
especially when it comes to the people that you're spending your time with as far as your romantic life is concerned.
Yep.
Whether you are a man seeking a woman seeking a man seeking a man, a woman seeking a woman, any denomination thereof, being intentional with who you spend your time with is something, like, time's the only thing we keep losing.
You can't get that back.
Yeah.
So, 100%.
It's our only, everything else is infinite, despite what people might think. But there's always going to be an infinite amount of money that you can make. So if you lose a bunch of money, you can make money back.
Mm-hmm.
Time, you cannot. So why spend it with mediocre people?
100%. I think that's also important, though, as a good lesson on the entrepreneurial journey. I think Gary Vee just said this recently. He was like, one thing that I'd like to reflect on is that, because he ate shit for 10 years, right? That's his thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's something where he said that the moments of spending kind of more quality time in those moments and not always having his head down, I think he was reflecting on that of like, hey, that's something he would have done a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important on the entrepreneurial journey. Like whenever we're doing all the things that we're doing, being very intentional in those moments, but also really soaking into them.
Right.
And accepting that, like, it's not about like taking, like, oftentimes it'd be like, we don't take breaks, we don't take holidays,
Right.
But it's like knowing when it's okay and like to say, listen, I accept in this moment that I'm going to just enjoy this beer, or I'm going to go hang out with Kumar and do a podcast, because it's not really work. It's part of the journey.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a huge lesson on the journey of, again, you can take that to entrepreneurship. You can take that to relationships, really soaking in and being present in those moments and being intentional with what you're doing. And
you could apply that to personal development as well.
100%. So that's a good thing that transfers across everything, because you won't regret it if you do that. You won't regret if you take time to be intentional in those moments, but you will regret if you look back later and go, man, I missed that opportunity to chat with my good friend for an hour. Man,
Right.
I missed that opportunity to go hang out with this beautiful woman that I would love to hang out with in person.
By the way, you got to keep walking that route, right?
I'm going to walk that route again. So if you are listening to this podcast, I will see you on that route.
and if she's not, it's her loss, man. You're going to find someone else.
That's right. But no, it was just cool. It was just another cool experience, right? Another one to share. So,
yeah, man. Okay, we'll tell you what, we need to do this again.
Sure. Anytime.
I feel we're only just getting started.
We didn't even there's so many things to chat about.
We barely scraped the surface. But this is, we opened with this saying that this is a 20-year relationship that you and I have.
Mm-hmm.
How do you even begin to scrape the last year's worth of events in each of our lives in an hour?
And we're also just getting started. So there's going to be a whole lot of other things to.
There's a lot of other stuff. I mean, you and Jess are going to be in the studio at some point, right?
Yeah.
You guys are going to be talking shop.
Yeah, talking
People are
co-parenting.
going to be able to. Yeah, people are going to be able to tune in for that as well.
I think that's really important. I think that's another piece and part of that journey of sharing lessons learned and knowing that there's other people out there that may listen to this, right, and take some motivation, some inspiration. And
I owe every single success, every single small success that I have ever been able to enjoy, and every failure that I've overcome, I owe it to the people around me, the people who were kind enough to share their lives, their love, their laughs with me. I wouldn't be who I am without the influence of the people around me. If even the smallest amount of this discussion can lift somebody's spirits, I'll feel good about that.
100%. That is the beauty of it all. As you go on your journey, there's tons of people out there on their journey.
Yeah.
And they only need to hear that, hey, like, you're going through that.
They're not alone.
I'm going through that too. And you're like, whoa, let's chat about it.
Yeah.
So definitely, these are the beautiful moments that matter.
Yeah, I feel like sharing mistakes is a gift. When you can share your mistakes, when you can, first of all, forget sharing it, take a step back. When you can be graceful with yourself when you make a mistake, and then you can be graceful towards others and compassionate towards others by sharing that mistake with them, you're freeing them up to make their own mistakes. And hopefully they take that lesson learned that you experienced during your own fuck-ups, falls, missteps, and they can apply it to their life in such a way that it will carry them further than they would have gone on their own. And, I look at this and I say, I'm climbing to the top, man, whether people want to come with me or not, I'm climbing to the top, but I want to bring as many people with me as I can.
Yep. 100%.
And so if that's a way to do it, then that's what I want. We'll leave that discussion. That's going to be a fun one. We'll leave that discussion for next time.
For sure.
But yeah, man, I'm glad you got to jump in, and I'm glad you got to see this place firsthand. We'll do it again soon. Let me know when you and Jess jump in so that we can share it with anybody who's paying attention.
100%.
And yeah, man, round 2 soon. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much, brother. Really
Cheers,
grateful to be here. And I love you so much, man. One of my best friends. And we're just getting started. So
amen. See you next time, fam.